So anyways, I'm in elementary school and I'm assimilated. And then there's this new immigrant that comes and she's Filipino too. And my teacher is like, okay, why don't you sit with Paolo because, he's also Filipino. And, I was introduced to her by another teacher and they had us sit together during lunch, right? And she opens her bag and it is Tupperware, right? With white rice and chicken adobo. My favorite food right now, right? That's like our national dish. But I was so colonized. I was so assimilated. I looked at her and I was like, ew, what's that? Right? And then really inside, I was like, damn, that looks bomb. Like, I want to eat that. But right? Like, it's like what Freire says, the oppressed oppressor, right? You start to hurt your very own people.
I'm Joey Yongchen Liu, educator, researcher, storyteller, and coach. And this is Everyone Needs a Story for the Campfire. This podcast brings you impactful stories each week, drawn from my guests' lived experiences. You will gain inspiration, insight, new perspectives, and hopefully a sense of familiarity and belonging as we explore the themes that make us all at once uniquely individual, yet collectively human. This week, I sit down with Professor, elected official, and activist Paolo Magcalas. Paolo brings the theme of love in his story of activism, tracing his days from the high school classroom all the way to the boardroom as an elected official. In his second story, Paolo candidly shares experiences of growing up in America as an immigrant and the effects of colonization on his life and his communities, both in the U.S. and the Philippines. All right, welcome back to Everybody Needs a Story for the Campfire. I am so excited to introduce to you guys this guest here, Paolo Magcalas, who is a dear friend of mine. He's a professor at Cal State Los Angeles, a board member at Anaheim Union Elementary, and he's an activist, educator, and ethnic studies advocate. Welcome to the Campfire, Paolo. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Joey, how's it going? Hey, everybody.
It's great. It's so awesome to have you here. I cannot wait to get into your stories. I know that they're going to be insightful, entertaining, maybe even a little bit humorous because you're so much energy. And I'm so excited to have you here. But before I pass off the mic to you to tell your stories, I really want my audience to kind of know our origin story together. Because as I was reflecting back on it, it was so serendipitous and happenstance how we even ended up colliding and in each other's worlds. So this is how the story goes from my perspective. I used to always work late, right? Like we're working the same district, but at different schools. So we didn't know each other. I used to always work late. I had two students who loved dancing. They're dancers. They were really close to me. And they were like, hey, Miss Liu, can you take us over to Loera? There's a dance battle happening tonight, but we got to get over there like right now. I was like, yeah, I had their parents' permission. They jumped in my car. We went over and they joined the dance battle that you happen to be producing, right? You and your club were putting it on. I mean, maybe you can share your role. I know that I just ended up running into you because I needed to use the restroom. And like out of all the teachers or staff that was present, I went up to you and was like, hey, do you know where the restroom is? And is it unlocked? Can I go? And you walked me there. And then we ended up chatting for a bit in your classroom. And in your classroom, as soon as I walked in, I was like, okay, I got a vibe. Like this teacher's down. I saw like your artwork and the posters. And I think I saw either a picture or a book that you had of Paulo Freire. And I ended up commenting on it. I was like, wait, hold up. Are you a social justice educator too? Talking about Freire. And we just started chopping it up, realizing we had a lot of similarities. And you were in a PhD program at Chapman. And you're like, yo, you need to come check it out. And I was like, no way. Like I just finished my master's last year. I'm done with school. No way I'm going back to school. You're like, no. Like this program's meant for you. You let me know that the Paulo Freire Institute was at Chapman. So it piqued my curiosity. But anyways, we just hit it off right away and became friends. You eventually did end up getting me into the PhD program. So I have you to thank for that. I have you to thank for really changing like the course of my life with that moment. But beyond that, like you've just been such a amazing friend to me. My kids call you uncle. You literally like came and stood in the rain in the middle of the ocean for my wedding with Michael.
Yep. Yep.
We've marched together, partied together, and everything in between, right? We have
Oh
so many
yeah.
amazing, amazing
Aw,
memories spanning
those
all
were
our
good
friendship.
times. I really miss
Yeah,
those times. But
I know we're far away now, but it's amazing to sit here across from you, and your friendship means so much to me, and the work that you do is so amazing. So I cannot wait to hear from you today and share with my audience a little bit of your life and what you do. So thank you for being here, Paolo.
yeah, you're absolutely welcome. Thank you for having me. It's so great to see you. Do you want me to share on how I met you with regard from my lens?
Yeah, yeah, let's
Okay.
do that.
Yeah, I mean, in the district that we worked at, there's not a lot of educators like us, like-minded. And that was actually my very first year teaching ethnic studies,
Yeah.
right? So the event, which is an event that I did even before ethnic studies, was called Anaheim's Best Dance Crew. And I just knew in the school district that kids love to dance. And that was the time when America's Best Dance Crew was going on. And I was like, let's offer a space for kids to battle, to compete, and just show how amazing they are at dancing. And I didn't remember taking you to the bathroom, but I do remember this, that you were just there for your students, right? You were that mother figure. You were that concerned educator that was just watching their students and making sure that they were okay. And right there and then I was like, who's that? She's there, she's present, and she's, that coach on the sideline that's nervous, but at the same time telling their students,
Yeah.
not directly, but, with the eye, that teacher eye, like, okay, you know? So I already knew that, first of all, that you cared about our kids, and we
Mm.
need that so much in education. It's just someone to be present, especially at extracurricular events such as this. And that's the big thing that I remember from that night. And yeah, thank you for bringing students there. It was a great event. Western is has an amazing dance uh, students, and I think they won. I think we did that event a total of 5 times, and I think
Mm.
Western took 3 of the championships. So a little bit of
Yeah.
competition, but it's okay.
I gotta shout out Jabri and Sean because those were my kids that I brought, and they're like I call them nephews. They're so to this day
Mhm.
super close to me. Actually, I just was helping Jabri with his job resume and cover letter like a week ago. So shout out Jabri and Sean for making that all happen, and thank you for recognizing that. I think we saw that in each other that
Mm.
Um, we grew up in that community. You and I were similar. Like
Yep.
we both grew
Yep.
up in that neighborhood. Those were our corners and streets and
Yeah.
neighborhoods, and we got those kids. We understood them from their own perspective, and they needed more than just a teacher that was going to be there for like 5 periods a day and then out.
Yep.
And they needed aunties and mom and dad and uncle figures in their life looking out for
Mm.
them. And you and I both happen to come from a paradigm that allows us to embody that space in a way that maybe like feels more taboo for other teachers, like
Yep.
like just stay within a professional box. But our kids needed love, right? They needed
Yep.
love in a way that was family and safety and
Mm.
structure. And so we saw that in each other. And also shout out to Anaheim's Best Dance Crew, because you and your team and your students and whoever was doing that with you put on an amazing event. It was so much fun. And I have to say it, you are a b-boy. Like you were able to put on those dance programs because you come from the world of dance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, you were
1990s hip hop, breakdancing, emceeing. And it's crazy right now. The kids are bringing it back, right? With the baggy
Mhm.
clothes and the just the style. And they love 90s hip hop. And it's just so beautiful to see that come back. And
Yeah, I remember we were always like 90s hip hop, 90s hip hop. We were like looking for the clubs with 90s hip hop. We were looking for our people with 90s hip hop. And now it's like everywhere. You can find it. The kids get it now too, huh?
they do. They really do.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah.
Yeah, well, awesome. Good times walking down memory lane with you a little bit. But we're gonna get into your stories that you brought into the campfire, and we're gonna do
Okay.
some connection to the themes that we've had weaving
Okay.
throughout this entire season. So, my last episode, we had Alison here at the campfire, and she shared with us in her second story a theme around love, and specifically, she was touching on love and love languages within her family unit, with her kids, with her
Mm,
partner, and what it means to be motivated by love, to learn how to express love to others in a way that they're able to receive it. But this theme of love is going to show up a little bit probably differently in your story, right?
okay.
You're going to like touch on the idea of love as sort of a motivating factor for the work that you've been doing as an educator and activist. So if you're ready, you can go ahead
Yeah,
and
no,
take it
no,
away.
I'm absolutely ready. In the end of the day, when it comes to ethnic studies, when it comes to critical pedagogy, right, one of the central tenets, and I'm quoting Dr. Antonio Darder. She wrote an entire book on Freire, but focused particularly on love. And the work that we do as educators, you're right, has to go beyond the four walls. We know our students come with a multitude of layers of issues, of houselessness, of traumas, adverse childhood experiences. In the end, we worked in urban schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
To work in West Anaheim, there's just so many things that our students go through, and then add now the pandemic, right? Um, and going back to this concept of going beyond the four walls, uh, the magic happens just way more than just what happens in the classroom, in your pedagogy. And that was hard for me to really learn, because the first 5 years I was a teacher, I was trained under the No Child Left Behind era, right? It was all about data. It was all about uh,
Yeah.
multiple choice exams. Every single week I had department meetings. We would always look at data, and where students missed answers, and how we can make the question better. But really, we weren't looking at kind of like the 5 C's, right? More of the
Mm-hmm.
skills, which incorporate uh, uh, collaboration, critical thinking, civic education, but most importantly, and I believe this last C, which also is very relevant to love, is compassion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is a key thing that I had to learn, and just learning from the PhD program that we were a part of, is being able to become a facilitator of knowledge, learning with your students, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not being that teacher who knows all the answers, who just shares content, who lectures all period, and gives their students a multiple choice test at the end of the unit, and boom, there's knowledge, right? If
Yeah.
they have a great grade, it's because they memorized presidents and memorized dates. That is not teaching, right?
Yeah.
Especially nowadays when it comes to this age where there's just so much information. Students can get information from a variety of ways. Um, but really, to be able to take 3 steps back and listen to your students, listen
Yeah.
to their lived knowledge, their experiences, what they already know, right? Being community responsive, and then adjusting your curriculum to what you as the educator learn from them. I believe
Mm-hmm.
if that's not love, then
Mm.
uh, you know what is? I mean, to really listen first is something I believe that a lot of educators don't do enough, right? They just
Mm.
want all their students to be, and going back to No Child Left Behind, right? Where that left a lot of children behind because we didn't adapt to their community or their culture, their ways of knowing. We didn't view them as having knowledge, right? And going back to this concept of Yoso's, who's a professor at UC Riverside, the various capital that students bring to the educational spaces, right? Like linguistic
Yeah.
capital, aspirational capital, resistance capital, right? They bring a plethora of information to the classroom, and that's often not acknowledged by educators.
Mm.
So, so really. it wasn't just about teaching ethnic studies, right?
Yeah.
Including their stories into the curriculum and into history, her story or their stories. It was really about the pedagogy and being
Mm,
able to say, look, I'm going to throw away our pacing guide and I'm going
mm,
to look at themes. I'm going to uh, uh, take action on the issues that we problem pose together as a class community, and even discipline, right? To and when I started teaching ethnic studies, it was beautiful because I never gave one single detention out. Right? We utilized restorative practices, which is in itself a very long process of
yeah.
figuring out the problem or issue that the students were facing or a group of students were facing, and just being able to have those hard conversations. And even if it was me as the educator who did harm, right? Like, that's the difference with being an ethnic studies or just any educator today, right? Focusing on the whole child, right? You have to know everything that they're going through. And that is what radical love is
Mm,
knowing that when you're doing the work, right, that it will come back. It will eventually get easier because you'll get buy-in from other teachers. You'll get buy-in from the community. They'll know that teacher who's doing the work. And it wasn't easy transitioning from the banking educator to the ethnic studies educator, but over time it did get easier, and I started building more allies. I started meeting more amazing educators like you, right? And knowing that I wasn't alone in the work, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think that's one reason that we gravitated to each other, is because I could see when you were standing watching your kids dance that was love,
It
right?
was
That
love.
you were tired,
Yeah.
you worked, you probably had a PLC meeting that morning, you probably had like a bunch of emails to do, grading to do, and teaching, and then you still made it on the other side of Anaheim to just be there for your students, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, oh my gosh, I shared so much. And then after, so I taught ethnic studies for 5 amazing years. I learned a lot. I finished my PhD, and then I got an offer from Cal State LA to be a professor, right? A teacher
Yeah.
educator. And that
Woo-hoo.
and that was hard, because I love teaching, and
Mm-hmm.
I just love and I also taught in the high school in which I attended, right?
Yes.
And
How
ethnic
many
studies,
years?
a total of 15 years. I was a teacher for 15 total years. So to
Wow.
leave was really hard. One of the reasons why I left was because when I looked at the surveys from Cal State LA students and why they decided to go there or
Okay.
become educators,
Mm-hmm.
was because they wanted to go back into their communities
Mm-hmm.
and serve and be the best
Mm.
educators and give them opportunities that weren't given to them. And
Yeah.
boom, right there, I decided that I'm going to do that because that is what I did. That's what you did, right? To serve your community, to serve your students with love, uh, and I wanted to give the tools that I had learned as a teacher to pre-service teachers in East Los Angeles. And
Yeah.
as you know, in East Los Angeles and throughout LA County, a lot of the students go through a plethora of challenges similar to that of our students from West Anaheim. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I love it. It's an amazing decision. I don't regret it at all. I do miss teaching ethnic studies, but now I can teach future educators, right? And I just finished a cohort of teachers from the Alhambra Unified School District. I want to give a shout out to them. They are tasked with developing their school district's ethnic studies curriculum, and their heart is also in it. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to share that. It's a lot because it's the end of the semester now, right? And I
Yeah.
just invited my students last week, and I can't wait to see what they do in their classrooms. But they're ready, and I'm so excited for all of them.
For sure.
Yep.
I thank you for sharing all that. impossible to listen to you speak and not hear the passion in your voice, tracing your story from the time that you were in the high school classroom. Like you said, you
Yeah.
spent 15 years there, 5 years teaching ethnic studies, is really a pioneer in our district when it was still, not, we all had to fight for it. And you're one
Yeah.
of the leaders in that fight for it. Was constantly under attack. Now then transitioning into, preparing the future teachers to go into the classroom. And there's, I heard a little bit of like bittersweetness in that, like how hard it is to leave the classroom. And that's something that I share with you and understand. But still trying to step into that position that you have now of continuing your service, continuing to make an impact and a difference, even though, your place has shifted a little bit and who you work with has shifted a little bit.
Yeah.
I can hear the love and the passion remain intact. And I think even as you touch on, you get quite passionate about, like, I think what you were touching on is really things in the system of education that have failed our students. So when you're talking
Mm.
about multicultural ed or No Child Left Behind, and for folks that are listening who are not as well versed in these sort of educational contexts and terminologies, these things just refer to a lot of systems that were put in place and legislature that was put in place,
Mhm.
top down, right? That we as educators, or maybe as parents, you might have felt this too. And for sure, students felt this, that they were
Mhm.
just not allowing students to thrive, to learn, to exist in their intact humanity. We saw a lot of harm being done within the
Yeah.
classroom and in our communities by some of these systems and
Yep.
legislations. And you have always been such an activist, so tirelessly working and collaborating with the community to make change. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much for
Thank
that
you.
first story. We're going to transition a little bit now into your second story, because
Okay.
you've kind of taken us from what you're doing now and maybe the last few years, but let's peel it back a little bit. The second story is
Yep.
going to talk about the themes of immigration and what decolonization looked like for you. And that might be a buzzword or maybe a new term for
Mm.
some of my listeners. Immigration certainly is more familiar, but maybe in this story, you can help break it down a little bit, what it meant for you to come and grow up in the United States, moving here from the Philippines.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. Well, first of all, I came to the United States when I was just 3 years old, right? My mom had actually come to the United States first, right after I was born, right? So when I saw her again at age 3, I didn't even know who she was. She came to the United States, like many Filipinos, to be a nurse, right? And when she saved enough money, then she was able to bring both me, my dad, and my sister here to the United States. And it was tough, right? Like to have to adapt to the American way of life. But I do remember in grade school, and I want to share a story because I think this is my way of apologizing to this student. I had already been assimilated, right? Or colonized to the American way. Uh, I had my lunchbox, right? My Ninja Turtle lunchbox. I had my, ham sandwich with no lettuce, just ham and bread. I had my juice box and my gummy snacks, right? I had assimilated. I had dressed, American. My mom even put like clips on my nose to try to get my nose pointier, right? That was a thing. Uh, yeah, and growing up, we also used Escanol to lighten our skin,
Yes.
right? Because it's a
Hmm.
very colonial way to be lighter in skin, even in the Philippines. There's literally
Yeah.
billboards over the Philippines. Manny Pacquiao. Last time I went to the Philippines, I remember seeing Manny Pacquiao's wife, a huge billboard, right, of her super light skin, and then like bottles of Escanol, which is a
Yeah.
brand that we
Skin.
used. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's very, very popular in the Philippines and here in the United States to lighten your skin. So, anyways, I'm in elementary school and I'm assimilated. And then there's this new immigrant that comes, and she's Filipino too. And my teacher is like, okay, why don't you sit with Paolo because, he's also Filipino. And, I was introduced to her by another teacher, and they had us sit together during lunch, right? And she opens her bag and it is Tupperware, right, with white rice and chicken adobo. My favorite food right now, right? That's like our national dish. But I was so colonized, I was so assimilated. I was like, I looked at her and I was like, ew, what's that? Right? And then really inside, I was like, damn, that looks bomb. Like, I want to eat that. But right, like, it's like what Freire says, the oppressed
Yeah.
oppressor, right? You start to hurt your very own people, right? And
Mm.
there's also this thing that's very colonial, right? I think the work is from E.J.R. David or Kevin Nadal, uh, and they research on the colonial mentality, right? That we have this competitive spirit amongst Filipinos that oftentimes will even, or that crab mentality, right? Will put
Mm.
them down in order to be above them. I think
Mm.
that is what I had at such an early age already in elementary school, right? To compete with other Filipinos who just came, where it should be the opposite,
Mm.
where I should have helped her, right? I should have
Mm.
shared my food. I should have taught her about American food and, maybe get some chicken adobo out of it. I don't know, right? But how damaging would that? I always wonder how damaging was that to her, right? As
Mm.
another Filipino, hearing it from a Filipino, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
oftentimes make fun of newly arrived immigrants,
Yeah.
right? Especially if they have an accent, right? So that's some of my early experiences with colonization. And, to be honest, I never even learned about the concept of decolonization until I did my PhD,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't until we started to learn about critical pedagogy, ethnic studies, critical race theory, decolonizing education, or just ways of being, right? It's like I have to catch up now that I'm older, right?
Mhm.
And I also want to take this moment to apologize to the my first students that I
Mm.
taught during the No Child Left Behind era, right?
Mm.
Because all I did was teach them a very Eurocentric curriculum.
Mm.
I didn't even know, and if it's okay, I want to share another story, right? This is
Yeah,
another
yeah, yeah,
reason I
that's why
think
you're
it's
here.
so key. So we went over the Spanish-American War, right? What happened in Cuba, what happened to our other colonies. But then I had a Filipino kid raise his hand, and he said, "Hey, Mr. Magcalas, there's a paragraph here on the Philippine-American War, but you didn't talk about it. Can you share a little bit?" As an educator, right, who had his master's degree, who learned about social studies education, who took the CSET examination, I didn't even know about the Philippine contributions in the very curriculum I was teaching. So after that moment, I
Wow.
was depressed. I was so sad that I had been so colonized that I didn't even know that Larry Itliong fought alongside Cesar Chavez during the Great Delano Grape Strike. That Filipino Americans also got beat up alongside Mexican Americans during the Zoot Suit riots. Right? That there
Yeah.
even was a war called the Philippine American War. Right? That we used to work in Alaska in the canneries. That the first uh, settlement, a Philippine town, was in Louisiana, right? Was it Louisiana in the bayous? Oh man, I feel bad, but it was in the South, right? There's just a lot of histories, her stories and their stories that are not included. And
Yeah.
after I, did, or when I started my PhD and I started teaching ethnic studies, that's when I started to unlearn, right? That's when I
Yeah.
started to not just unlearn the content in which I was teaching, but also unlearn my pedagogy and how I taught it, right? And
Mhm.
that was a very difficult journey, but I did eventually learn, and we're still learning all the time to not just within the curriculum, but in our daily lives, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
from the foods we eat, right? Every morning I eat spam and eggs. I love spam and eggs. I love Vienna sausage. And I grew up with that, right?
Yeah.
And those are foods that were brought to the islands during World War II from Americans, and it just became part of our culture. But that processed foods, is killing us, literally, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
um, we are not eating, you know, the things that we ate uh, like our ancestors did,
Ancestor. Hmm.
right? The way in which we live our lives, the way in which, and I want to give a shout out to my cousin from Hawaii, who teaches me all the time, you know, words in Hawaiian such as malama aina, right? Giving back to the land, and taking care of the aina, the land, because it takes care of us. It gives us the foods that we need. And what do we do with the land? We pave the land. We build. We put GMOs into our fruits. All of that is part of decolonization. And really, in the last decade of my life, it's not just within the curriculum, but it's in just the way I live my life, and
Hmm.
to try to respect the land and honor the land, and really just heal, right? It's been very difficult, and not just during the pandemic. The last 3 years of my life, a lot of my family members have been passing away. In fact, my dad, he's sick right now, and it's primarily because of our diet and our bad habits that I attribute to colonization. It
Yeah.
really is the truth. Um, I think we would live longer lives. I think we would be a lot more happier and less stressed if we just started to seek it. And I know if
Mm.
we seek our ancestors and their ways of knowing and ways of living, that we will live happier lives. So
Mm.
that's my journey right now. I'm trying to slow down, always continuing to learn, but most importantly, really live the life I want to. Love the life I live the life I love. What's the saying?
Live the life I love and love the life I live.
Yeah, just live through certain principles that are not just in Hawaiian, it's in many of the indigenous communities. In Machika culture, I've been researching a lot of Machika indigenous epistemologies and ways of knowing and being. And it's very similar to Hawaii, very similar to the Philippines, very similar to a lot of indigenous communities throughout the world. And yeah, what I love about teaching teachers now, because I also do consulting work with different districts. In fact, I did one in Corona Norco last week.
Yeah. Oh, last
Uh,
week. Yeah.
yeah, just last week. And about 6 months ago, I did a training in the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and I was teaching them about the Nauyolin, which is a indigenous Mayan or Mexica epistemology that I learned from Sean Arce, one of the original teachers from the Tucson Unified School District. And when I was sharing about this, another teacher stood up and said, in Indian culture, in North Indian culture, we also have a similar system and belief, and it aligns so similar. So really, my journey right now is to see and try to compare and contrast the different ways and that indigenous groups find balance, right? Because the
Yeah.
purpose of the Nauyolin is to find balance, because you can't do this work unless you have balance. And the current system that we have today in education and food and life and competition and everything, right, is killing us. Is
Mm-hmm.
killing us,
Yeah.
is making us die earlier.
Mm.
And, ethnic studies is not just a curriculum, it's life itself.
Mm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
really, I'm just blessed to to know people like you and other amazing educators that are uh, always teaching me.
Mm.
So the journey's not done. We're
Yeah.
still learning together, and
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you so much for opening up all of that. And as I was listening, you started with coming at the age of 3, which is so similar to my story. I also was I hadn't turned 3 yet when I came from Taiwan to the US. Um, and that loss of familiarity and then just being immersed in a completely new world, right? But you took that all the way through and you've tied it beautifully actually to the work that you do now,
Mm.
and how you're continuing to hold space for ethnic studies, which I understood better as you tied the two stories together. Ethnic studies is a space of love for you to kind of recover what was lost as
Mm.
you're colonized. And I heard as you moved through your story, some of the things that felt like you had lost in this assimilation or colonization process when you started with that first story of that classmate that you had, right? There was like a
Yeah.
loss of the community relationships, right? The loss of safety in your identity. And something as common as food, right? We just eat food to nourish our bodies every single day, could have potentially become a memory of harm, right? A memory of almost like disgrace for this student. And thank you for your awareness and surfacing that. I don't know if you have a story being the receiving end of that before you did that to that young girl, but I know I have my stories of coming to America and being told to speak English before I even
Mm,
knew I wasn't speaking English, because I code switched so
mm.
naturally in the home that whether I was speaking Hakka with my siblings or English to my mom, I had no idea that different languages were coming out of my mouth. And so it was around the age of like 4 or 5 that I was yelled at by a teacher, speak English. And
Wow.
it was traumatizing for me too. And it's almost like until you've received that, you don't even know to pass it on to people around you. So I'm certain that you must have gone through some right experiences like that where you thought like this, we for safety we need to appear as American as possible, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I
Yeah, I could share. I mean, uh,
yeah,
when I was growing up, also in elementary school, I remember one time waiting in the lunch line, right? And then out of nowhere, a kid jumps in front of me and goes, "Ching chong willa willa bing bong," and I was like, "What the?
yep.
Heck? I'm not even Chinese,
I
right?"
had that happen
I think
too.
I was in fifth grade, but already by
Yep,
fifth grade, I was getting picked on for looking like I was Chinese. Right, that
yep,
was my very first experience. In the end of the day, I could share so many experiences
yeah,
of harm that was done to me from junior high to high school, all the way to when I was a teacher. And I admit,
yeah.
I'm going to share this right now. You know, um, I was doing a professional development training in Anaheim Union, right? And after the training, there was amazing educators there, but and every district training I've done, there's always a few naysayers. I don't know why they
Mm-hmm.
go to the training, but there's always one or two that are just there because that they don't believe in the work and they're there
Mm.
to do something, right? Um, and there was two in the training that I worked with at Loera, and one was just giving me looks. At the end of the day, I went through the training. I did, everything that I always do in terms of, making sure that I hit all the major theoretical frameworks that guide ethnic studies teaching and curriculum. But I had left that training so exhausted that I was just so traumatized from a lot of the years in which I did teach at Loera as an ethnic studies teacher, being the only teacher at the site to teach this curriculum, that it brought back memories of microaggressions
Mm-hmm.
uh, that were done to me when I taught the curriculum. Uh, saying that this work wasn't valid, that it was, uh, you know, communist, Marxist, very anti-American, very anti-white, anti-capitalist. But most importantly, the things that hurt the most and what reminded me of was when I would be called things like little brown brother, right? There was a teacher in particular that used to say that as a joke, right? But I remember it, right? Like, right? I know I'm little, I
Like
know I'm
well,
brown, but like that was used historically during
yeah.
World War II, during the Philippine American War. I mean, it's just a term that is very, very rude to Filipinos. And one
For
time,
sure.
even one time, a counselor had pointed at during back to school night a shirt I was wearing, right? And it was Henry Giroux. And by the way, Henry Giroux is white, right? He's a critical pedagogue,
Yeah.
but he's white. And he's like, "Oh, nice shirt." Oh yeah, I forgot you're doing that multicultural education, ethnic studies, whatever, right? And I know Giroux would totally be for it, but like, it's like, the hell? Like, clearly he's a white dude, and like, I don't think you know who Henry Giroux is. I
Mm.
mean, if you did, that'd be great. But it was just weird. Like, it's just a lot of like aggression towards me in those last 5 years that I taught ethnic studies, something I never had experienced 10 years before, right?
Mm.
So, um, Yeah, thank you for making me remember all these moments. But in the end, like those are the things that we always remember, right? The things that were the harm that was done upon us. Um, Gosh, I can go on and on, but those are just a few stories that I remember uh, from adolescence all the way to high school and
Yeah.
teaching. So,
I think, as you surface these stories, and these stories are important because it explains why we behave the way we behave, whether that's to put walls up to try to protect ourselves, to that what erodes the trust between us. That, when we come from paradigms of collectivism, we come from collective peoples where trust is foundational, and working together and caring for the land and caring for a community together. Um, when that trust is eroded because we've gone through so many days of our life facing microaggressions and betrayals and systems that pit us against each other or position others over us simply because they were born into families that speak a different language, speak the dominant language or have lighter skin or, whatever these traits are that are granted them privilege over people like us. When we start to understand these stories is when we start to do our healing work, like you were touching on, I think. And so as I was listening to your story, I was saying the loss of, like I said, the relationships, the community, the familiarity, even as you kind of brought it full circle back to the food and the health, our community's ability to really like nourish our bodies the ways that our ancestors always did. And now we're facing health crises because of these systems of colonization. And then yet, right, you've tied it into why you do what you do today and why you fight so passionately and why you try to create safer spaces for the students in your district, and for the teachers who are going out to do this work. So thank you so much for bringing these stories to the campfire. They can be polarizing and they can be very sensitive, but my goal here is just to facilitate a space where every single story matters, and that the more that we listen to each other's stories, the more perspective we gain and the more
absolutely.
empathy we cultivate. Because at the end of the day, until we've lived, unless we've lived, right, thousands of days in somebody else's lives, there's no way that we can understand why they say the things they say, do the things they do. And that's why we have to reach for empathy every single time, like deep listening and empathy to one another's stories to understand why we fight so hard, why we're so passionate for change, and why we are still working to undo so much of the harm that was put on us. So thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you
Yeah,
for
you're
sharing.
welcome. Thank you for having me here.
So before we wrap up this episode of the podcast, I would love for you to reflect on our overarching theme of this season, which is
Okay.
stories that reach. Every
Yes.
single one of my guests this season has some experience with actually putting their voice, whether through writing or through speaking, and their stories out there to a more public audience, which can be an extremely vulnerable thing to do. But for those of you who have taken the brave step to do so, whether for you, I guess maybe in your activism, your teaching, and
Okay.
your publishing, right?
Okay.
Putting your story out there, what would you say is the impact of having stories that reach strangers?
Yes, absolutely. As you know, I just recently published an article in the Journal for Teaching, a Journal for Ethnic Studies Pedagogies. And
Congrats.
yeah, so it's my very first publication that I did by myself. And I interviewed amazing educators from various school districts, from Los Alamitos, from Santa Ana. And then I also interviewed you, right? And
You did.
I did. And it was a beautiful piece because uh, to be the first social justice, ethnic studies, to be that first educator, right? Uh, those stories matter because right now, the ethnic studies graduation requirement is just a requirement. Anybody can teach it now. Well, not anybody. Now they're doing trainings, now there's certificate programs. But really, it's something that districts have to provide. So really the main reason that I wrote that article was so that other future educators can hear the stories, the
Mm,
struggles, not just
mhm.
necessarily the way in which they taught ethnic studies, but what they had to go through,
Yeah,
right, to do the work, because it
right.
wasn't easy, right? It's important to just share stories in general, right? Even in your
Mhm,
curriculum, we've gone away
mhm.
from storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Whenever I visit my cousins in Hawaii, it's always talk story.
Talk story.
That's all it is, right? I
Yep.
learn more from talking story with my
Yeah.
cousins. I've learned more about Hawaiian history. Uh, I've relearned, stories from the ways in which, my family perceived events when we were in the Philippines as young kids, through story. And it's
Yeah.
such a powerful thing that we're getting away from. And just
Mm.
going back to ethnic studies, right? A lot of the literature we learned in English classes were typically dominant narratives,
Yeah.
Eurocentric perspectives also, right?
Right.
That oftentimes don't emphasize storytelling, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I love about the times right now is students are, if you're doing ethnic studies right, you're going to hear more stories, and even
Mhm.
allowing students to share their stories. In my ethnic studies pedagogies class right now at Cal State LA, their final is to do oral history, her story or their story projects where they
Yeah.
interview a family member or someone important in their life. And I had students present their work as an option for extra credit. And when I first offered that, only about, I think, 4 students wanted to do it, right?
Mm.
But then after they did their interviews, after they wrote their papers, half my class wanted to present at the student symposium at
Mhm.
Cal State LA.
Mhm.
They were so empowered to share. One student even told me that, I never saw my dad from that perspective. But when I heard
Mm.
his
Mhm.
story, it was probably the most powerful thing. And I gained a different level of respect for him because of what he had
Yeah.
to endure coming to
Yeah.
this country. So it's all about stories. That is the
Yeah.
core foundation of ethnic studies. Oh, wow. We just learn the core fundamentals of ethnic studies. There's stories and love, right? Those two things,
Yes.
mandatory. That
Beautiful.
that should be incorporated into the model curriculum, right? Can't do it without love. There should be a certificate in love and storytelling in addition to getting your ethnic studies certificate. But it is the core. It is the foundation of everything. And yeah,
Well,
yeah.
awesome. Thank you for sharing all of your stories and all of your insight and all of your passion here at the campfire with me today. It's so good
Yeah,
to
thank
see
you.
you. This isn't really a gift for the audience. I think really an education, eye-opening for sure, of what the fight looks like from the perspective of an educator, activist, and leader as yourself. So thank you for being so candid and so passionate with us today here, Paolo. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, you
And
too. Thank you. Thanks
yeah,
everyone for listening. And
yeah, for
so
sure.
good to see you.
And we will see each other in person soon. But for my audience, thank you for tuning in again. And we can't wait to have you come and learn from more stories at the campfire next time. So thank you for being here. And we'll sign off for now. Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Paulo's stories are full of passion. I'm grateful for his reminder to center stories and love in our fights for change and empowerment in our communities. If you want to check out more of Paulo's works, hit the links below. Thank you for being here with an open ear and open heart. I'll see you next time here at the campfire, and we'll have more stories, insights, and shared exploration of what it means to be a human.